Is Christian McCaffrey a buy or a sell this offseason? All that and more this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for our listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. She is Kate Magdziuk. Check her out on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. Kate, today we are reviewing the 2022 seasons of the 49ers and the Bengals. My first question to you, is Christian McCaffrey a buy or a sell this offseason?
I'm buying, Marcus, and I feel like I'm not alone in that opinion based on the current value of Christian McCaffrey, based on his dynasty startup ADP. If you bought the dip on Christian McCaffrey, congratulations, because in the most recent batch of dynasty ADP, he was drafted as RB2. RB2. So maybe if you want to buy him, he's not going to be a very easy buy, but he's skyrocketing up draft boards, and I do think that he showcased plenty of upside here in his brief stint. Didn't look like the best, the most promising season for him right off the bat. Had a few down games before his trade to the 49ers, but you've got to be blown away by what we've seen, right, in San Francisco.
Yeah. I mean, listen, this is coming from somebody who hasn't always been the biggest Christian McCaffrey fan. But I look at like the 9 games that he played this year. If you remove the first game he was with the 49ers and then the last game when they were playing Arizona and they didn't really have a lot to play for. So those 9 games where he was full go, he averaged 74 rushing yards per game, 45 receiving yards per game. He had 5 receptions during that time, and he scored 9 touchdowns. So averaging almost 110 yards a game, averaging a touchdown, actually threw a touchdown as well. Like, he's just a perfect fit for this offense, whether it's Trey Lance at quarterback or Brock Purdy or Jimmy Garoppolo for the millionth time. I kind of do think he's RB2. And Kate, you look at, like you mentioned, the startup ADP. He's being drafted as like, I don't know, 7th, 8th player, kind of after that tier of the receivers, the Justin Jeffersons, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, CD Lamb, Jalen Waddle. I can get behind that.
The thing is, like we mentioned, the cost for him is going to be pretty darn high, but you know what you're getting. When healthy, he is 100% producing. Some recent trades for Christian McCaffrey, a 2023 first round pick. I can't see what number pick it is, so that's the caveat.
I would say if it's not one of the top 2, I'm 100% in.
Okay, perfect. Me as well. What about Christian McCaffrey for Tony Pollard and Calvin Ridley?
No, I'll take the McCaffrey side pretty comfortably there.
Okay, Christian McCaffrey or Dak Prescott in a super flex league?
I think I'll take Dak in a super flex.
Okay. I think that you're getting a lot of value here right now for Christian McCaffrey, despite how high the dynasty startup ADP is. The trade market doesn't feel as aggressive, which is interesting.
Well, my question for you, is he the clear-cut RB2 for you? Because obviously Jonathan Taylor is RB1. McCaffrey RB2? Does that feel right? Or would you rather go with the youth of Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker?
I honestly, all 3 of these players are kind of in the same tier for me. So I would take, like, if we're in a trade situation, I think a trade for all 3 of those guys straight up is, a fair offer. I feel like the value is kind of 1 for 1, but in terms of a dynasty startup, I'll take whoever's available to me when I'm on
Late.
the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, whoever's available latest on the board, that's who I want because I think all three pose very similar upside. But it's hard to argue with the immediate value that Christian McCaffrey has to your dynasty team. That upside's going to be very hard to compete with, even despite what we've seen from Brees Hall and Kenneth Walker.
Um, I would lean Kenneth Walker just because he's 5 years younger and he's not coming off a big injury like Brees Hall
Mhm.
is. If Hall was 100% healthy, I would take Hall. But I do like the safety of Kenneth Walker. I got a lot of other players I want to ask you about with the 49ers. Uh, but just really quickly, Deebo Samuel. We've been talking about this for a while now. I feel like Deebo is undervalued. He's currently being drafted as wide receiver 16 in dynasty leagues. He's only 27 years old. What am I missing here?
I think it's overall the narrative that this team is, uh, they've got so many options, right? Like we heard them complaining about it at one point during the 2022 season. Um, I think the thing to know about Deebo Samuel is again, you're getting a lot of upside like you are with most assets on the 49ers team, but you are getting a little bit of volatility. And I do think
Sure.
that's what's maybe scared some people off, despite the fact that, we've seen him continue to perform. Finishes the overall RB 36, but he missed
Wide receiver
four
36.
games this
Yep.
year. Wide receiver 36, despite missing 4 games this year. Um, Only had 2 wide receiver 1 performances on the year, just 2 games with more than 20 fantasy points. So we definitely saw that overall ceiling decrease in 2022. But I think the better question, like I understand why people are cooling on Debo. I really do, because what what you saw on a week to week basis from him in the 2022 season wasn't overly inspiring. He only had uh, 1 game of more than 20 fantasy, or sorry, 2 games of 20 or more fantasy points in comparison to the the 8 he had last year. Um, I, I don't know. I think the better question is why are you buying the dip and why is 2022 the anomaly season for you?
Because I just think he's one of the best players in the league. And he dealt with a couple injuries going into the year and during the season. I we saw in the Seattle playoff game, right? Like he is just such a dynamic and great player. And he's kind of going into his prime right now. He's 27. He just turned 27 years old. And if I can get a player that had 1,700 yards and 14 touchdowns just a year ago, at wide receiver 16, give it to me because I'm not sure there's 5 receivers better in the league than Deebo Samuel. That's all.
I think that's
It's,
fine. I
it's
think
just a
that's all
pure
right.
bet on talent. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown is nowhere near the player that Deebo Samuel is. Now the situations are a little different because he gets so much volume and stuff, but I just can't justify somebody like Amon-Ra St. Brown being ranked as wide receiver 6 and Deebo Samuel being ranked as wide receiver 16. There's just such a gap in talent to me that I'll take the guy that's going, 20 spots later in a draft.
Yeah, I think that all feels fair. I think there's just I don't know. I understand the hesitancy, but I also understand the upside. So I think it really depends on do you want to bank on talent, and if so, 100% Debo Samuel is a buy. But I also understand if maybe you want to opt for a player with a higher floor whose ceiling is maybe a little bit
Sure.
lower. That goes back to how you like to construct your dynasty rosters for me.
We're going to talk about another 49er receiver in just a second. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual. So when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions, and they're going to help you learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient, secure, and accessible anywhere, 100% online. Everyone deserves to feel their best. BetterHelp makes it easy to get started. As the world's largest therapy service, they've matched millions of people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. All the benefits of in person therapy, plus it's more convenient, more accessible, and more affordable. All you have to do is fill out the brief questionnaire to match you with your therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can move on whenever you want. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That is betterhelp.com/lockedon. This podcast is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner here on Locked On because they are the #1 sportsbook in America. It's FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's actually even better because they have so many great offers and features available right now to you. If you download the FanDuel app right now, you can bet on Super Bowl 57 with a no sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on, my goodness, nearly everything. Money lines, point spreads, teasers, parlays. Who's going to score the first touchdown? Who will score the last touchdown? Will a safety beat happen? Will the national anthem go over 2.5 minutes? I think that's the number I saw this morning. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid instantly when you win. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Kate, I want to ask you about Brandon Aiyuk, who had over 1,000 yards this year, 8 touchdowns. Really felt like a breakout year. Are you buying Brandon Aiyuk this offseason?
I am, and I do think that Brandon Aiyuk honestly is a little bit of the reason why you might be just a little bit more hesitant maybe on Deebo Samuel because of the fact that, I mean, the two really had very comparable seasons, Marcus. Brandon Aiyuk had 3 games of 20 or more fantasy points in full PPR formats. I mentioned with Deebo Samuel's 12, ranked 10th in total touchdowns. You know, 18th in receptions, despite ranking 25th in total targets. He was really, really solid with, all of the opportunities he got. Ranked 15th in total fantasy points, 23rd in fantasy points per game. He was really, really solid. I don't know how else to put it. And the beautiful thing, Marcus, is he's got a lower cost, and that's the kicker for me with Brandon Aiyuk, is the fact that
Do you know where he's being drafted right now?
I would probably guess in the mid-20s.
Wide receiver 23. Yep.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, that feels right? And if I can get Brandon Aiyuk at wide receiver 23 versus Deebo Samuel at, what did we say, wide receiver 15?
16. Yep.
I think the upside is similar. The floor feels similar. I think, Deebo, you're getting maybe an extra 1 to 2 fantasy points per game in terms of his rushing production. But outside of that, it feels like these two are kind of one for one, and Brandon Aiyuk is the much more affordable asset.
He is. He just doesn't have the same ceiling that Deebo Samuel has, right? Because you can't put him in the backfield and give him 8 touches on a random week, right? He can't do that. However, as a pure receiver, as a route runner, I mean, it's comparable, I guess is what I would say. We're going to talk about, Kate, another receiver in our next segment that could possibly be traded this offseason. Possibly. I wonder about this with Aiyuk because you look at San Francisco's cap situation and their roster. Deebo Samuel's getting top 3 money. George Kittle, one of the highest paid tight ends in the league. Christian McCaffrey is the highest paid running back in the league. Trent Williams, I believe, is the highest paid left tackle in the league. Brandon Aiyuk got a rookie contract, and with so many teams needing wide receivers this offseason, Would it surprise you if a team came in and was like, "Hey, San Francisco, Ayuk's your number 2 receiver. We'll give you a first round pick plus to take him off his hands before you have to worry about paying him." I just don't know if that possibility impacts your thoughts on him at all long term.
No, I don't think it does personally. Um, again, we try to predict, as much as we can what teams are going to do, and certainly contract as part of that conversation. But I also think like eh, blow it up this year. Like we've got at least one more year of him in the 49ers offense, correct?
Yes, I would
Like
think so. I think
I don't
next
think
if they're going to trade him, it's probably next year.
Yeah, I well, the so his contract, let's see, it goes through the 2023 season.
But they have the 5th-year option, I
They
believe.
have the
It's
5th year
yeah,
option. Do they take it? I don't know.
I
I
would
would
assume
imagine
so.
you would,
Yeah,
and then, like you said, possibly trade him. Um, we'll find out about that 5th year option here pretty soon, but I think you gotta expect that we're at least gonna get him with the team in 2023. They're just too close,
yeah,
uh, to that championship that, I think he's worth figuring out the money for,
I agree.
even if cap space does get a bit tight. But again, there's no shortage of weapons in this offense. It's berserk. It's absolutely berserk that we can spend this much time talking about all of these different assets, and it still feels like we're not talking enough about all of these
Yeah,
assets.
and we have to mention the quarterback situation really quick before we move on. Um, I mean, my thoughts on Brock Purdy kind of going into the championship game. I was buying Brock Purdy. Now it's completely different with the going to have Tommy John surgery, could potentially miss an entire year. I would assume Trey Lance is going to start week 1, but what do you do with this quarterback situation, Kate?
I think you buy Trey Lance. I think if there's anybody willing to still buy Brock Purdy, you sell. Um, yeah, I like Brock Purdy a lot. Again, there's always been this sort of concern regarding his draft capital, etc. And that got magnified about 100 times more when we got this news regarding the Tommy John surgery. Not just is it about the immediate impact and the potential for him to miss the 2023 season, you have to look at what this injury is going to do overall for his arm, and what is his throwing motion going to look like? How much, if any, strength is he going to
Yep.
lose following this injury? It could be significant. So, if there's somebody who's maybe in a rebuild who's willing to, acquire Brock Purdy on the chance that he comes back and he's Superman hero guy in 2024, I'll go ahead and I'll take that and take whatever I can get for him. But I do think Trey Lance is the guy of the future. Um, and again, really nothing's changed since we first evaluated Trey Lance. I keep saying that. Maybe the only thing that's changed is that it's been even longer since we played football, since we've seen him play football. But Marcus, like this guy came out with a very limited resume to begin with. And the one nice thing is we saw with Brock Purdy, he was able to come in and execute this offense with limited professional experience.
Yeah,
So
I mean, they're probably cheap enough that you could just go buy both and just hedge yourself a little bit. Trey Lance being drafted outside the top 12 quarterbacks, Brock Purdy being drafted outside the top 20 quarterbacks. Just go get both, especially if you're in your super flex league, and know that you have the whatever San Fran decides to do kind of covered going forward. I think that's probably the best option because, I mean, as we saw this year, like when Brock Purdy played, he was putting up QB1 numbers. And we've got to assume that Lance, because of his rushing ability, could put up QB1 numbers whenever he plays. So go buy both of them. That's our advice this offseason. Let's talk about the Bengals and what do they do at running back in 2023. Before that, I'll let you guys know that this podcast is sponsored by Blue Nile. Valentine's Day is coming up, which means romance is in the air more than usual. I don't need to tell you all you lovebirds out there, but you probably had this marked in your calendar for weeks now. You probably already have the date all set up. You maybe even got some, chocolate ready to go, got the flowers already ordered from the florist. But if you haven't found the perfect Valentine's Day gift, you should check out BlueNile.com. You can find jewelry as unique as her within modern convenience of shopping at BlueNile.com. You can find the perfect piece of jewelry for life's special moments or even create the custom engagement ring of her dreams. Their simple online tools let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style. Blue Nile will then handcraft the perfect piece to your specifications. Blue Nile provides expert guidance, in-depth educational materials, and unique online tools that place you in control so you can forget all the usual hassles of the shopping process and focus on the romance. Blue Nile's diamond piece guarantee allows you to compare a competitor's diamond against one of their own. Blue Nile can even meet you, or they can sometimes even beat their price. Every order is insured and it arrives quickly in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shipping is free and so are returns. Right now, you can save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That is BlueNile.com for up to 50% off. BlueNile.com. Okay, I want to ask you about the Bengals running back situation as we finish out our team previews here. Joe Mixon was arrested last week. Charges were dropped, I believe, on Friday. But he was outsnapped by Samaje Perine in the AFC Championship game. Mixon a little bit up and down this year. The Bengals can release him. What are you doing at running back for the Bengals?
I'm not sure what the Bengals do long term, Marcus. It feels like they probably opt to release Joe Mixon just based on his current contract situation. Um, he hasn't been efficient, and as you alluded to, he was outsnapped in the biggest game of the year, which is kind of crazy. But I mean, Joe Mixon, he earned his contract, right? He's been paid, and now heading into 2023 carries just $5.5 million in dead cap. Um, the ability for them to move on if they are just kind of ready, it that that ability is there. He ranks 7th among running backs in total cap hit, 3rd in cap hit for the Bengals team as a whole.
By the way, they could
He's
just really quickly, they could cut him post Q1 or designate him as a post Q1 cut and save over 10 million.
And that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money, especially for a team that's probably maybe looking to sign Joe Burrow to what might make him like the most well-paid quarterback in the NFL. I don't know. But they're going to need some money. Joe Mixon, he's going to be 27 years old this year. He's racked up the touches, hasn't always been overly efficient with those touches. And, I think I'm ready to move on. I've never been a big Joe Mixon person in fantasy, right? Like he's
Mhm.
just not been my style. I don't like the inefficiencies, the ups and downs. Um, had one finish this year as the overall RB1 in that game where he had 153 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns, 58 receiving yards on top of that, and another receiving touchdown on top.
Yep.
Like that was the most insane game of the season. 55 PPR points. Outside of that, the ceiling wasn't all that particularly high and the floor was relatively low. Um, I'd be looking to move on. And I think this is kind of the perfect draft class for the Bengals to do it in. There's a lot of depth at the running back position that could open the door for them to move on and not have to necessarily pay up for immense draft capital to do that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think the best situation for Cincinnati would be like bring back Samaje Perine on like a 2-year, $5 million deal, and then go draft somebody in the second round. Right? You don't need to use your first round pick, but go draft somebody in the second round that can be with Burrow for the next 4 years on a rookie contract. And that seems like to me, Kate, where the value is in this class. But even if they wanted to sign a veteran running back to cover themselves some more, like let's rule out the top options like Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, Tony Pollard. I don't see them paying for any of those type of players, right?
Right.
But what if they went out and got David Montgomery on a reasonable 2-year, $10 million deal? like somebody that could be an in between the tackle runner? Or what if they went out and got Raheem Mostert to give him some more speed on offense? Or what if it's Damian Harris, who is another tough inside runner? Like I could just, it just makes a lot of sense for me to move on from Joe Mixon and his cap hit, invest that money into a similar running back and save a little bit so you can keep it for T. Higgins, who's a free agent after next year, or Joe Burrow, who is a free agent in a couple of years. It just
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense to me.
I think there's just this is an interesting point, right? Because I mentioned the running backs in the 2023 draft class and some depth at that position there. We didn't even necessarily hit on the number of free agent running backs this year. You mentioned some of them at the top, but this is a very deep year at running back in
Mhm.
terms of the free agency pool. Um, they're going to have their pick of the litter. So I don't know why they would necessarily go back to the well for Joe Mixon, who is aging. He's very high up there on the touch total, and I just think why would they want to kind of consider continuing to play this game with Joe
Yep.
Mixon when they, it's
He
he's a
I think
complicated
he
guy.
has value, but not at that price, right? Maybe, and maybe that's what happens. Maybe they ultimately work out some kind of pay cut or restructure uh to get
And if
him on
I'm Joe
more of the floor.
Mixon, I'd be interested in taking a pay cut to stay with this team. So
Yeah, because you're not
that's not
getting
to say it doesn't happen.
right. Because again, with the running backs I mentioned, Barkley, Jacobs, Miles Sanders, Tony Pollard, like he's not getting paid more than any of those guys. And now it comes to like, okay, do you pay Devin Singletary more than Joe Mixon? I think Mixon's a better player, but Singletary doesn't have some of the off the field stuff. Do you pay I don't know, Jamal Williams more than Joe Mixon? I would assume Mixon would get more money than Jamal Williams, but who knows, right? So I think you're right. I think it seems likely that Mixon comes back, but maybe at a reduced contract. We shall see. Really quickly before we go, no chance this team trades T. Higgins this offseason, right? No chance.
I don't think they can. Similar to like Brandon Aiyuk, I just don't understand why this team would necessarily put themselves in a position to sell when they still have a little bit of time left on the clock.
Yep.
And T. Higgins is such an integral part of this offense and what makes the passing game work.
Yep.
Um, he's a luxury, of course. Like there aren't a lot of teams out there that have two bona fide wide receiver ones. The Bengals have it. So again, it's a luxury, but it's also a luxury that helps sustain the floor of your franchise quarterback and gives him what he needs. So I think the Bengals have a lot of big decisions to make. Does that impact his dynasty value at all for you, Marcus? Because it
No.
doesn't for me.
Uh, there aren't many teams that have two number one receivers on the rosters, except for the two teams that we talked about today, the 49ers and the Bengals. That's probably why they were two of the final four teams left in the playoffs. Just outstanding rosters, so much talent galore. And I assume that both of these teams are going to be right back there next year. That is it for today's show. Thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast and get daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories, plus in-depth analysis on the biggest games with NFL key predictions every Friday. And on Monday, local insiders cover the weekend with game-to-game episodes. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, all the same places that you get the Locked On Dynasty podcast. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. Enjoy your week, and we'll see you guys next time.